They declared independence from a king, but not from an idea. In 1776, as the American colonies rose in defiance against the British Empire, the world watched what seemed to be a political rebellion, a fight for land, power, and sovereignty. But beneath the surface of muskets and declarations, something far more profound was unfolding. Because hidden within the very language of the American Revolution, in its ideals of liberty, equality, and rights, were echoes of ideas that had been debated, refined, and preserved for centuries inside one of the most powerful institutions in human history, the Vatican. This raises a question few have ever considered. What if the foundations of the United States were not entirely born in rebellion, but were in part shaped by the very tradition it seemed to reject? To understand this hidden connection, we must return to a world on the brink of transformation. The 18th century was not merely an age of revolution, but an age of intellectual upheaval. Across Europe, Enlightenment thinkers were challenging monarchies, redefining authority, and questioning the role of religion in public life. For the Catholic Church, this was a moment of profound crisis. The Vatican, which had long stood as a central authority in both spiritual and political matters, now faced a rapidly changing world where its influence was no longer absolute. And then across the Atlantic, a new experiment emerged, one that rejected monarchy altogether and claimed to derive its authority not from divine right, but from the will of the people. For Pope Pius VI, this was deeply troubling. To him, the language of the revolution, words like freedom and liberty, had been dangerously reinterpreted. What had once referred to spiritual salvation was now being used to justify political upheaval. The fear was not simply that a new nation would be born, but that a new way of thinking would spread, one that could erode the moral and religious order that had defined Europe for centuries. Yet even as the Vatican viewed the revolution with suspicion, it could not ignore a strategic reality. The British Empire, the very power the Americans sought to overthrow, was the strongest Protestant force in the world. Its weakening could create opportunities for Catholic influence to expand in ways that had long been impossible. And so, the Vatican found itself in a position of quiet contradiction, wary of the revolution's ideas, yet aware that its success might ultimately serve its interests. While the official stance of the Church remained cautious, events on the ground told a more complex story. Catholics in the American colonies were a small and often marginalized minority facing legal restrictions and social suspicion. And yet, despite this, some of them would become central figures in the fight for independence. Among them was Charles Carroll, a man whose influence would defy the expectations of his time. As the only Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence, Carroll's decision was not merely political, it was deeply personal and profoundly risky. In a society where Catholics were often excluded from public life, he stood at the very center of the revolutionary movement, placing both his reputation and immense wealth on the line for a cause that offered no guarantees. At his side, though operating in a very different capacity, was his cousin John Carroll, a priest who would later become the first Catholic bishop in the United States. His role extended beyond religion into the realm of diplomacy, most notably when he joined Benjamin Franklin on a mission to Canada. The objective was ambitious: to persuade French-speaking Catholics in Quebec to join the revolution against British rule. It was a moment that revealed just how intertwined religion and politics had become. The revolutionaries understood that shared faith could be a powerful tool of persuasion, a bridge between cultures and allegiances. But the mission ultimately failed, and Canada remained loyal to the crown. Still, the attempt itself speaks volumes about the strategic role religion played in the formation of the United States. Perhaps even more revealing was what occurred behind the scenes in Europe, far from the battlefields of America. In Paris, as Benjamin Franklin worked tirelessly to secure French support, he was approached by a representative of the Vatican. The question posed to him was deceptively simple: who would have the authority to appoint Catholic bishops in the new nation? Franklin's answer would prove to be historically significant. He made it clear that the American government had no jurisdiction over spiritual matters, asserting that such decisions belonged solely to the Church and its followers. In that moment, without any formal declaration or constitutional clause, a principle began to take shape: the separation of church and state. It was not born out of hostility toward religion, but from a desire to prevent political power from interfering in spiritual life. Historians often view this exchange as an early and practical expression of a concept that would later become a cornerstone of American identity. Yet the connections between Catholic thought and the American founding run even deeper. reaching into the realm of philosophy. Long before Thomas Jefferson penned the words, "All men are created equal," similar ideas had already been articulated by Catholic thinkers. One of the most notable among them was Robert Bellarmine, a theologian who argued that political authority originates from God but is exercised through the people, a concept that closely mirrors the principles later embraced by the Founding Fathers. While these ideas were often transmitted through Enlightenment philosophers like John Locke, their roots can be traced back to Catholic intellectual tradition. The same can be said for the notion of natural rights, a central element of the American Declaration of Independence. This concept aligns closely with the teachings of Thomas Aquinas, who described natural law as humanity's participation in a divine moral order. According to this view, certain rights are inherent and cannot be taken away, not by kings, not by governments, and not by any earthly authority. Whether directly or indirectly, these ideas help shape the philosophical framework upon which the United States was built, blurring the lines between religious tradition and political innovation. Despite these deep and often overlooked connections, the relationship between the United States and the Vatican would remain complicated for generations. Early diplomatic contact was established in the late 18th century, but it was fragile and inconsistent. By the mid-19th century, rising anti-Catholic sentiment in the United States led to a complete breakdown in relations. In 1867, formal diplomatic ties were severed, marking a period of distance that would last for more than a century. It was not until 1984, during the Cold War, that relations were fully restored, driven not by shared theology but by shared geopolitical interests. Both the United States and the Vatican saw communism as a global threat, and their alliance became a powerful force in the struggle against it. Today, the dynamic between these two powers continues to evolve, often reflecting the same tensions that existed at the nation's founding. In recent years, disagreements between the Vatican and U.S. leadership have once again brought underlying conflicts to the surface. These disputes are not merely political, they are deeply philosophical, rooted in differing visions of authority, morality, and the role of religion in public life. In many ways, they echo the very debates that surrounded the American Revolution, debates about freedom, power, and the limits of both. So when we ask whether the Vatican played a role in the creation of the United States, the answer is not simple. It was not a direct creator, nor a hidden puppet master orchestrating events from behind the scenes, but its influence, through ideas, individuals, and quiet moments of diplomacy, is woven into the fabric of the nation's origin story. The United States may have been born in rebellion, but it was also shaped by a much older conversation, one that had been unfolding for centuries within the halls of Rome. And perhaps that is the most surprising truth of all, that even in a revolution against the old world never truly disappeared.